Good afternoon. It's on the morning. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for coming. We're delighted to have this session, partly because we're delighted to see people coming in and listening, but we will also be able to record the presentations here, and that will be a resource that we will put up on our website afterwards, which will be great. We are delighted today to be talking about how you keep your charity safe online. There are lots of questions around that, I'm sure, and we're very, very delighted to be joined by a couple of people who are going to help us talk about this. We have Alison Stone, who's the cyber coordinator for the Scottish charity, for SCVO. Sorry, Alison. Everybody knows that, that's fine. And from Kirstie Steele, who works with the Scottish Business Resilience Centre, and she's the community lead, and so she's going to talk to us today. And I think we're going to start with Kirstie, and she's going to give us a short presentation, and then we'll move over and we'll let Alison talk to us as well. So Kirstie, on you go.
Yes, thank you. I'm just going to share my screen here, so we'll pop that up and get that over across here. Can everyone see that one okay? Yes. Great, I've got thumbs up, so that's always a good sign. Yes, so myself and Alison will do a little introduction here for you in a second, but thank you for those that are just tuning in at the moment. We are going to crack on here, so there we are. So yes, good afternoon everyone. I'm hoping that this presentation will help you feel a little bit more confident on how charities are sort of being attacked at present, but most importantly some of the steps that you can take to help prevent some of these attacks from being a lot worse than they potentially could be. So I'm Kirstie. I am the Cyber Resilience Community Lead at the Scottish Business Resilience Centre. So I recently joined the team in July, and our aim is a non-profit organisation to help businesses and organisations manage their business risk. So I kind of lead on the cyber security side of things and give lots of different people advice on how to best protect themselves online. And then we also have on the call with us, doing a joint presentation with me, is the lovely Alison Stone. So I'll let you introduce yourself as well.
Thank you. My name's Alison Stone. I am the Cyber Resilience Coordinator for SCVO. My remit, or one of my many hats that I wear, is doing a lot of this work. It's talking to third sector organisations about becoming more cyber resilient, and putting in some awareness, some training, some really sort of simple hints and tips that will enable them to be that little bit more secure and resilient. The Scottish Government have a cyber resilience strategy, and we in the third sector have a third sector action plan. So a lot of my work is aligned to actions within this action plan, and raising communications and awareness around cyber risk is a big part of that. So I'm delighted to be speaking to you today as hosted by OSCR. If there's anything that you hear today, or any sort of education that you feel might be interesting for your organisation, I'm always happy to come out and have chats with different organisations to help educate your staff, your volunteers, in being that little bit more cyber secure. So thanks for the introductions, everybody. I shall hand back over to Kirstie, and we'll do this game of two halves.
Yeah, you get 2 for 1 when it comes to me and Alison.
It's a bargain.
Yeah, it's a good deal. Well, that's what we like to say anyway. So I'm just going to get right into it. So obviously today we're talking about cyber security. So the first thing to begin with is, what exactly is a cyber attack, so that we can get an understanding of this. So really it's something that a cyber attack is when someone maliciously tries to do these 3 things, which is damage, disrupt, or gain unauthorized access. And when I say damage, this could be something, for example, when somebody deletes a database and potentially keeps a copy of it at the same time. They could cause disruption to your organisation. So for example, a thing called a denial of service attack. That's when someone uses a program to visit a website from lots of different devices in an effort to kind of overload the capacity and cause it to crash. Sometimes, this can result in entirely innocent situations. I'm sure you've heard the term break the internet. It usually happens when there's a big Boxing Day sale on and we're all trying to rush to get those bargains, or usually when I'm trying to get a ticket for my favourite music artist online. You usually see that the website's out of service, but that could be one of the methods of a cyber attack. We've got when people trying to gain unauthorised access. So this could be, for example, someone trying to guess your email address and your password, or potentially trying to get you to trick them into handing those details over to you by filling out a legitimate looking form. And this will give them access to your emails and any of your accounts where you use the same sort of email and password combination. And the second bullet point on this screen is mainly just about the devices that could potentially be cyber attacked with all the different types of technology that we all use. So cybersecurity is a means by which an individual or an organisation try and reduce the risk of becoming victims of a cyber attack. So its core function is to protect the devices that we all use, you know, smartphones, tablets, computers, laptops, all of the above, and the services that we access both online and offline. So we're trying to protect it from theft or damage. But cybersecurity is also about preventing unauthorised access to vast amounts of personal information that we store on these devices and online. The reason that cybersecurity is so important is because we live in a digitally connected world, even more so now over the last number of 7 months. You know, we're all using these devices, smartphones, computers, tablets, in an effort to stay in touch with colleagues and indeed do our working from home. But so you can see how big part of modern life that this is, but imagine how difficult it would be to function without them. So from our shopping, our banking, our email, our social media, it's more important than ever that we take steps to protect our devices and prevent criminals from getting access to our accounts, our data, and these devices itself. It's also important to emphasise here that cybersecurity has a much greater sort of benefit to organisations as well through some things like natural disasters potentially. So having good cybersecurity will help protect your organisation from things like floods, fires, home and office robberies and stuff like that as well. So I'm going to pass on to Alison for the next slide.
Okay, I get to do the scary statistics slide. These are statistics and information that have been provided or have come out of the Cybersecurity Data Breach Survey, which is an annual survey that started in 2016, and it measures UK organisations' approaches to cybersecurity and the impact of breaches. It breaks it down by sector, so it gives some very, very interesting statistics for both the third sector, public and private sector. There is a note here saying cybersecurity is increasingly important for charities. 74% of charities say that cybersecurity is a high priority for their trustees and senior managers. That previously in 2018 was only 53%. So it's heading in the right direction. I'd be really, really happy when we get to 98, 99, but this is all a work in progress. Cyber attacks themselves have become more frequent. In 2018, 19% of charities identified, and that's a very interesting word, identified cybersecurity attacks over that 12-month period. In 2020, this has risen to 26%. Now, these are organisations that have actually identified and reported on the attacks actually happening. A lot of cyber attacks can happen in the background, and you can even not be aware of them until a little bit further down the line when it comes back to bite you on the bum. We've seen a real change in focus of cyber attacks during the period of the last 6 months during COVID. Cyber criminals have really seen the pandemic as a massive opportunity to change the focus of the cyber work, in inverted commas, that they were doing before, and doing it with a more COVID focused area. We've seen lots of different scams that have gone as the pandemic has gone down the line, has changed as we have experiencing different things. We've seen furlough scams, we've seen PPE buying scams, we've seen fake testing scams. The whole gambit of cyber criminality has reflected the moving areas of the pandemic. And recent surveys show that over 50% of Scots feel more at risk from cybercrime and fraud since lockdown began. And 1 in 5 people in the UK have received scam emails, calls, texts related to COVID-19. I think the other 4 people in the 1 in 5 are probably just not reporting it, because there's a whole load of stuff that's going on there that certainly falls into my inbox quite frequently. Over the last 6 months, this really scary statistic reported by Action Fraud is that just under £15 million has been reported lost by victims to corona-related virus scams, which is really, really scary stuff. So this is a big money maker for these cyber criminals. The funds that come from cyber criminal work can go on and fund serious and organised crime. So it's something that we really need to do our best to make sure that we guard against. I think that's that one, Kirstie. So why are charities at risk in particular? Charities per se are not so much at risk. In the mind of a criminal, you're just another organisation that they want to attack because they may get some monetary gain from it. There are little specific risks that are aligned to the third sector. Charities hold funds, personal, financial, and very large amounts of personal information and data. And these things have a financial value to the cyber criminal, whether they try and use it and attack another person or steal it and sell it on to other criminals. Charities also hold funds and data potentially with low levels of security to protect it. And being this easy target, if you are more accessible than your neighbour, then potentially you are going to be fall foul of this sort of operation. Cyber criminals themselves do, and we compare this to a house, for example, with security measures. If your house is the house that has the big barky dog and the Yale locks and the really reinforced door and the alarms and all the rest, and your neighbours doesn't have any of those security measures, your cyber criminal is going to look at both of these two properties and think, well, that one's too much like hard work to attack. And he's going to go for the one that is the weakest link. So one of our messages is even just putting the smallest, simplest cyber security actions in place can make you that more secure than your next door neighbour. Your cyber criminal will move on and rattle on the next door neighbour's door. Another thing that charities are part of, and it's part of the supply chain, they can potentially be a route into a bigger fish, like a local authority or a corporation that they maybe do data sharing with. Many charities, if they have commissioned services that have previously been done by government, local authorities, they can share systems or they can share data within data sharing agreements. And again, if the charity has the weakest link of the data security, that may be an area that cyber criminals could use to gain access to that larger organisation that's possibly slightly more secure than yourselves. It's worth mentioning at this stage a little bit about Cyber Essentials. Cyber Essentials is the NCSE cybersecurity standard, in inverted commas, that looks at 5 technical controls that is really good for organisations to put in place. It's not a difficult thing to achieve, and I can share a link with extra information and all of the details of the scheme with you at the end of this presentation. Another thing worth mentioning is there's quite a low level of awareness around cybersecurity, particularly in smaller charities. We do good work in the third sector, and it's like, why would anybody want to attack us? But unfortunately, a cyber criminal doesn't think that way. They just see you as another cash cow that they could avail themselves of. So although we're doing some really good stuff, it doesn't really matter to these guys. One of the surveys that I did quite recently with our Catalyst members, and it was quite interesting, is that a lot of organisations train their staff very, very well, which is brilliant, but they don't take that extra step to train their volunteers. And that's something that really must be part of this bigger piece of training. Train everybody that has access to your computer systems, whether they're paid employees or whether they're not, because you're only as good as your weakest link. So make sure everybody, even if they're not paid to work for the company, has that level of awareness and level of training. And the other thing where the sector falls down, and I think it's one of the loveliest things about the sector, is we have a real culture of trust. We trust our volunteers, we trust our people to go and work on our systems. If somebody phones us up and says, oh, you do some really great work, I want to give you lots of money, we quite willingly hand over our bank details. You don't get a lot of that in the private sector. Nobody would ever believe that in the private sector.
Definitely not.
we have this culture of trust that has sometimes, unfortunately, been used against us as a sector. So charities, are unfortunately at risk from the bad guys too. I think that's back to you, Kirstie.
Thank you. Yeah, so who is it that's actually attacking the charities? What does a cyber criminal look like? We've all got this image in our head, mainly thanks to a lot of Hollywood films that give us this perception of what a cyber criminal is like, and it's usually within this sort of format where it's always a he. He's always very young, late teens or early 20s. He hacked into his first nuclear missile facility at the age of just 5. He's usually in a hoodie. I don't know what this perception is with the hoodie and the black, the green screen behind you. Anyway, yeah, so he's so clever, that he cannot be defeated. But thankfully, this is not what a cyber criminal actually looks like, or is who is likely going to be attacking you. These are clearly just myths that go around. But here's an example of how it might actually appear in a situation like for yourselves. So I'm going to call this person Bob. So Bob, he was working in a warehouse. He's not earning a lot of money. He's on minimum wage. And his friend showed him where he could buy a list of email addresses and associated passwords on the internet. Now, these are a list of stolen items that were through data breaches that this list is now available, and criminals used this. Now, Bob didn't have any fancy IT degree. In fact, he would probably say to himself that he was never taught IT. But nonetheless, he's bought all these lists of the internet, of the email address and password combinations. And what he tried to do was enter them into a website that had loyalty card vouchers websites on. So most of the time when he was typing in these email addresses and passwords, they weren't successful. But when they were, and he got a match to one of the loyalty cards, he converted those points into vouchers, and then he sold the vouchers for a less than face value on legitimate auction websites. So he basically, after a while, bought a piece of software that enabled him to automate this process and make it a lot quicker for him to do it. This didn't take him much effort at all. You can see that there was not a lot of technical skill required to do this. These machines can do it by a matter of a few clicks. But what it did mean that he eventually, Bob, he was caught and he was arrested for fraud. But in this time, when he was doing this sort of process of stealing usernames and passwords, he made in the region of £150,000 from this simple scam. And as I said, this was very simple for him to do. He wasn't doing any sort of magic computer wizardry, but all he was doing was exploiting one of the simple things that most humans actually do, and that's reuse the same username and password on lots of different websites. So that made it very easy for them to gain access. But who in another sort of sense are these cyber criminals? Well, they're usually motivated by money, as Alison said. If it costs them too much time and effort to steal the funds and data from you, then they're unlikely to do it. I think that's my excuse to get a big angry dog that I can live with to protect mine. We have a thing called indirect attacks. So indirect attacks could come from the threats can come from direct attacks onto charities, It is common for charities, particularly smaller ones, to outsource their large IT infrastructure and data to third parties. So they can usually access this through their supply chain network. So that's vitally important to understand where you're sharing your information to, who has access to it, and how can you protect that information. We have the insider threat. So as Alison said, you've got a culture of trust there within your staff and your trustees and your volunteers. And a lot of them have access to your charity IT system and software. So it's important that you can manage who has access to what information, because later down the line, you might have a disgruntled sort of employee who could kind of pass your credentials to attack you and maybe introduce some malicious software onto your systems or steal data from your organisation before they leave, perhaps. But more commonly though, an insider attack is not usually intentional. Many of the users will download seemingly legitimate piece of software onto their computer in their day-to-day lives, but actually contains a virus or something that could disrupt your system. Sometimes it can be they accidentally click on email links that are phishing attempts. But these inadvertent insiders shouldn't be blamed. There should be a culture of support and reporting there, and helping your staff to understand to be a bit more security conscious and help them make the steps to know how to spot these things in the future, and look out for these examples of, like, for example, phishing emails, because as Alison said, your staff and your employees can actually be your greatest security asset. So the other ones at the bottom here, these are other people that could potentially attack your charity, but they are a lot less likely to do this. So there's hacktivists, terrorist organisations, and big nation state attacks. Sometimes charities can actually be impacted through these sort of activities as collateral damage. They aren't necessarily meant to be the main target, but they end up being damaged due to their sort of supply chain security, or maybe not updating some of their systems well enough, for example. But I'll pass on to Alison to talk through how our charity is being attacked.
Thank you, Kirstie. Before I get into that, there's a wee aside. When we were doing our training for this course, we were trained by the guys at the National Cyber Security Centre, who are the oracle on all things cyber, and they were telling us and this appealed to me because I'm quite nosy, a really scary story about cyber criminals dropping USB sticks, memory sticks, outside people's workplaces, and members of staff would walk past this memory stick. Oh, there's something on the floor, pick it up, go into the office and plug it into the machine just to see if they could, put it back to their owner. And the criminals were using this tactic to put malware onto the network, just because we all have a natural desire to be helpful, or nosy, if you're me. And yeah, that was one of the ways that insider, in inverted commas, was being used against organisations. These guys are very, very inventive, very, very clever. So, anyway, that was an aside. So how are charities being attacked? And I think Kirstie's mentioned the word malware a couple of times. Malware is basically malicious software. Attackers try and get malware and spyware onto your systems in an attempt to have a root around at the back end of the systems to steal data or look for more valuable leads that they can monetize in some way. There's a lot of ways of getting malware onto your system, but the common ones are clicking on links that aren't as genuine as you think they're going to be, you getting caught up in a phishing email, and we'll talk about those in just a second, or by visiting unsecure websites. All of these things could be tools to introduce malware onto your local device or onto your organization's network. Business email attacks, phishing remains the biggest thing that is the way that attackers attack our organizations, and there's many ways that they can do this. I don't know who else here gets a regular email on a Friday afternoon from the chief exec asking you to go out and buy Amazon vouchers. happens to me every Friday afternoon. It's very well crafted. They've obviously done their homework and worked out that Anna Fowley is our chief exec. I work for SCVO. And they send me a nice email saying, oh, Alison, go out and do this because I'm not in the office just now. That is a form of phishing attack where they've used some form of social engineering to find out a little bit about you and ask you to do an exercise that will get them more money at the end of the day. So different ways of cyber phishing is tricking staff, trustees, volunteers into clicking onto a link or an attachment that seems genuine but contain malicious software or send you to a fake website. Tricking employees with financial authority into transferring money into criminals' different bank accounts. A UK charity lost £13,000 after an email of its CEO was hacked and a fraudulent message was sent to the charity's financial manager with instructions to release funds. This stuff's really, really scary. Gaining access to a staff or volunteer email address to send emails purporting to come from that person. Starting a dialogue with them and then asking for donations, or in the case of business mandate fraud, asking you to change the details of the account to which you are paying an invoice, for example. There's a huge amount of phishing examples and ways of being able to identify phishing that we haven't got time to get into today. But as Kirstie says, they're very, very legitimate looking, and should anybody in your organization fall for them, please do encourage them just to be very forthcoming about what has happened, and have this culture of, look, there's not a blame here. If this gets reported, if you tell us what's happened, we can deal with this in the best way that we can. The other things that we see, fake organisations and websites, your criminals react really, really quickly, particularly as we saw during COVID to national disasters, anything that we go, oh, that's really bad, let's give some money towards that. They throw up fake websites, or they hijack links to organisations, so they are sending money that you think you're giving to a particular organisation away to a different bank account. And yet they can set up fake organisations, very legitimate looking front-facing stuff that really just direct you into a different way. So the other thing that we're going to talk about, and Kirstie and Ross are going to talk about this in great detail, is ransomware, and that is gaining access to organisation systems and taking control of the data that you have there. But I'll let my friend over there explain it in a bit greater detail.
Thank you. Yes, so ransomware is a type of malware, which is malicious software. I understand there's quite a lot of these terms that we're saying today, so don't feel like too stressed if you're not quite picking them up, because we will point you to sort of resources that you can kind of read up, and there's glossaries that can help you as well. So ransomware is a type of malware, which is malicious software that prevents you from accessing your computer or the data that's stored on it. So the computer itself may become locked, or the data on it might be stolen, deleted, or encrypted. And some ransomware will also try and spread to other machines on a network. So normally with ransomware, you're asked to make a payment, often demanded in a sort of type of cryptocurrency such as Bitcoin, in order for you to unlock the computer or gain back your access to your data. And the most common way that this is sort of spread onto the machines is disguised as an email attachment and sent to employees. So this type of attack is not uncommon. We have seen many cases of this attack reported over the years. There's been some very recently in the news in the last number of months or so. You may have been aware of them, and we'll maybe pick up on some of them shortly. But we do have Ross that's going to talk through a little bit of a ransomware case study and what happened to this particular charity. So, well, is it okay to hand over to you, Ross, and get you to talk through that one?
Yep, that's great, Kirstie. Thanks very much. I just had to change rooms there. Yeah, so this is actually a real example of a case. We've kept it anonymous for obvious reasons, but what I'll do is just highlight the main points to highlight a real life example. So the example of the charity was the gross income of the charity was 3 million plus. They were an employee organisation, so they had between 35 and 50 staff, and they had been established some time before they were awarded charitable status, so they had over 30 years worth of data available. The type of attack that was carried out was just exactly what Kirstie was mentioning there. So it was a brute force attack, and their data was encrypted by ransomware. Now, it's worth highlighting as well that this attack happened at the start of the COVID pandemic, which made it all the more difficult for the charity trustees to deal with as well. So we can come to that in just a second. Upon establishing that the charity had been attacked, they were held ransom and requested to pay £25,000 in the form of Bitcoin, which is a cryptocurrency, in order to receive their data back. So upon this happening to the charity, the trustees considered the options that were available to them. One of the options was investing significant amounts of money into a new data system, reducing the operations of the charity based on the data that was encrypted, or one of the options that was considered by the trustees was paying the ransom. I'm sure Kirstie and Alison will cover more about that particular option and our advice on that, but that was one of the options that was considered by the charity. And this came to our attention through what we call a notifiable event, and what I would say at this point is it's appropriate, if anything like this does happen to a charity, to inform OSCR of it through our notifiable event, which can be found on our website. So the trustees took it upon themselves throughout their decision-making processes to contact Police Scotland, so they reported it to the cybercrime unit, and they also reported it to their insurance company. The trustees, after deliberation, concluded that it was within the best interest of the charity to pay the ransom, and this was a point that I found particularly interesting, is that they were able to negotiate with the hackers. I wasn't previously aware that this would ever have been an option, but I guess if you don't ask, you don't get. They managed to significantly reduce the amount of money that they had to pay from £25,000, and they ended up paying a reduced amount of £7,000 in the form of cryptocurrency. Before doing that, what they sought to do was seek assurance from the hackers that they were able to provide or return their data. So they sent them links to a couple of files, which the hackers then provided back to the charity as evidence to say that although we've rendered your data at the moment, we could return it to you. So they carried out that, and then that provided the trustees with some sort of assurance, although they could never be sure that their data wasn't copied or could be used against them in the future, but that was enough for them to make the decision in order to go ahead and pay that ransom. So in the end, the charity trustees made the decision to pay the reduced amount of £7,000. The charity have been provided by their insurance company, so again the importance of insurance is highlighted there as well. Appropriate insurance types. So the charity financially are not in a worse position than what they were before, and our key area of interest going forward is going to be what lessons have the charity learned from this, and what steps have they put in place going forward to ensure that this type of attack doesn't happen again. But that there is sort of an overview of a very real example and a very recent example of that. So just on that next slide there, I'm not sure if I'm handing back to Kirstie at this point.
Thank you.
Or Carol, sorry.
Thank you, Ross. What I wanted to just cover on this slide here was just really how we at OSCR would see this type of attack and what our considerations would be in terms of how the trustees acted and what we would expect from trustees if they are found to be in a situation like this. And the three main things are report it, resolve it, and recover from it. So in terms of the trustee duties, obviously the biggest thing we have is the responsibility to act in the best interests of the charity. And the example Ross gave there, obviously the trustees took a lot of time to consider what their options were, and as you mentioned, one of those was to pay the ransom. We would always recommend against that, and we didn't know that that was the option to take because it was a little bit later in the process, only a matter of days, but a little bit later in the process that we found out about that. And there's a number of reasons why we think about it in this way. You need to know your data, so you need to know what your risks are, and you need to know what has been stolen. So actually having a good awareness of what data you have within your organisation in the first place is crucial to this, so that you know what the risk is to this going elsewhere.
there was again, Ross mentioned that this charity reported having 30 years worth of data available to them, which was true. But why did they have 30 years worth of data? So we need to consider, are you keeping stuff that you shouldn't have anymore based upon your information handling procedures and policies and things? And that's going to be crucial to protecting vulnerable information and sensitive information from hackers, is by only keeping what you need to keep. It's really tempting to go, I might need that one day, but if it's not within your data retentions, then you don't have it. So start off from that first principle, know what you have. If somebody approaches you and you know, we're looking at how the trustees have responded to it, we will be considering things along the lines of, what options did the trustees consider? So the first thing is, make sure, if you're in a large organisation particularly, make sure your employees know to tell you if you're a trustee. Because quite often employees will, you know, have quite significant roles, highly paid roles for managing the organisation, but the trustees' responsibilities are to know how to respond to these things, and we want to know what their reaction is, because they're in governance and control of the charity. So make sure that you have reporting procedures in there. You need to consider the reputational risk to your charity when you suffer an attack like this. Quite often the first response from people is, do nothing, it'll go away, hide under a rock. It won't happen, it won't be bad, they'll just be bluffing. It's really important, just as Alison mentioned earlier on, to tell people that this has happened. So tell people within your organisation, if you're a member of staff that establish it, tell people quickly that this has happened, because that's the best way to stop the risks becoming even greater. Tell us, tell any other body that you're regulated by, and look for appropriate support from the likes of SCVO, from Kirstie's organisation, from Cyber Resilience. Don't be scared to tell people. That's probably the biggest thing. There is advice, there is support out there. We will, quite often people come to us, the job that Ross and I are involved in is quite often seen as being the bad guys in OSCR, where we're going to come and tell you all the things that you've done wrong. But actually our approach to compliance and investigation work within OSCR is very proactive, and very much, what can we do to help you get out of this situation and make sure that things are running going forward properly. Not necessarily to go and, you know, get everybody in the biggest amounts of trouble that we can push at them based upon our powers within the Act. So please speak to us, and I'm sure all the other organisations, including Police Scotland and everybody else, also want you to just tell them. The other aspect of that, in terms of hiding under a stone and not telling anybody, people worry that they're not acting in the best interests of the charity if they don't, if they tell people, because it damages the reputation of the charity. And I can completely understand that. You feel that you're a bit embarrassed about what's happened, and it's been a bit of a mess, and I'm not going to tell anyone because that's going to make our charity look bad. In the long term, keeping it quiet is going to be worse for the reputation of your charity, because as soon as somebody does find out about it and it's in front of the Daily Record, you go, oh, yeah, we didn't bother telling anybody. That's not ever a good look or a good media line that you want to be seeing. So please just talk and report. There are loads of people that you can report things to, so it's deliberate that there's lots of question marks on this slide, because we're not going to give you a definitive list of what you should and shouldn't do, because it will be specific to the type of charity you are, the size of the charity, the type of breach, that the data breach there's been, and the resources available to you, and the potential impact on your service delivery and your and the longevity of your charity going forward. So there's lots of just questions that charities need to be seen, and trustees need to have seen to have asked and considered when they've been making their decisions on how to do this. So it could be that you're reporting to Police Scotland, insurance, your banking provider. What about your service users? Consider telling them, is it their data that you've lost? You may want to be telling them to say, to reassure them as to what you're doing about the situation. You've got other regulators. What about funders? If funders have given you money and there's a potential that you're going to have lost some of that money, you need to be speaking to them and being upfront about that, so that it doesn't damage your reputation for any potential funding applications going forward. Information Commissioner, if there's data gone missing, look at your responsibilities in that. And I know Alison and Kirstie are going to go into some of those types of reporting bits a little bit more later. So the big thing is, be transparent and tell people and look for help. And that way, as bizarre as it might sound, no matter how bad it is, nobody's going to be coming and blaming anybody for it. We're going to be looking for ways to help you get through it. And that's probably the biggest message that we would put out. Again, we would say, no, please don't pay the ransom. And it's not just about that means you're giving money to criminals. That's obviously huge. We don't want people doing that. But if we do it that way, it just encourages more of that kind of behaviour. We want to make sure that even if you ended up saying, I think the analogy I would use, if you were getting work done in your house and you were getting new windows and you didn't choose the cheapest quote, then that's sometimes okay because you've looked at the quality and the reputation of the product that you're getting and of the service provider. The same is true for this. So if you end up paying out more money than the ransom because you have gone to a reputable company that can help restore your data and you've paid more for it, we're okay with that. It doesn't come down to even that you've spent the least amount of money. Okay, so there's loads of things to consider. No right or wrong answer, but just ask for help as you go. And the recovery side of things would very much be look for the advice and support going forward. Consider a step-by-step plan to get your service back up and running if it's been impacted on it. Look at the reputational needs. Do you need to be doing some online some ongoing communication to tell people how you're progressing in terms of the actions that you've taken? And look at training. And that was mentioned earlier as well. You know, the telephony side of things is, you know, sometimes it's just somebody that's in there on a volunteer basis answering the phones, and someone phones up and says, oh, your internet's going to be turned off tomorrow. I need you to just do this, this and this. And before you know it, that's your entire system compromised just because somebody was like, oh, it would be terrible if our internet provider was turned off tomorrow because we provide an online counselling service. So they just go with it. It's that trust thing again. So make sure all of your staff and volunteers are trained to know what types of things to look out for, just as if it was in your own house. So they're the kind of the big things that we would look for. And just, there is no blame. So just come to us, let us know, and we'll do our very best to help if something does happen. I think it's back to Kirstie after that.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ross and Carol, for that information. I thought that was really useful. It was really interesting to hear a kind of real life example of how it can impact a charity and those sort of advice and support that the OSCR have in place there to support your organisations. So I am going to talk you through some of the simple steps that you can do to prevent malware and ransomware affecting your organisation. So there's no way to completely protect your organisation against this sort of malware infection. So what you should do is adopt a defence in-depth approach, which means you use multi-layers of defence with several mitigations at each layer. I want you to assume that malware will infiltrate your systems at some point so that you can take the steps to limit the impact that this would cause and help speed up your response. So here are my top tips. So be wary of any unexpected emails. So emails is the one main causes of infection methods for this type of ransomware, especially if they contain links or attachments. Be wary of anything that kind of comes in that you're not quite sure about. And again, make sure your employees are trained to spot these fake emails coming in. Backing up your data regularly is the single most effective way of combating ransomware infection. So think about how much you rely on your business critical data, such as customer details, quotes, orders, and payments. And now imagine how long you would be able to operate without them. All charities, regardless of the size, should take regular backups of their important data and make sure that you do your backup regularly and recent, but also check that they can be restored should something happen. Make sure that the backups actually work. By doing this, you know, you're ensuring that you can still function following the impact of other kind of things like floods, fires, and theft and damage. But also the backup is your important thing for you to be able to quickly recover, and you can't be blackmailed by ransomware attacks. So you want to keep everything up to date. So all of your devices that will prompt you to do a download and install the latest update, you should do this as soon as possible. Carrying out these updates, although sometimes they can be a pain, I would do them and have a wee cup of tea in between times. It's actually one of the most important things that you can do to improve your security, because each update with it brings new fixes for the known vulnerabilities that are part of the system. So it helps you straight away. If you have any options on your devices to set this as automatically update, then I would turn that on, because it means you don't need to worry about it again. Having a good antivirus software on your computer. A lot of them are actually included for free with most popular operating systems. It's sometimes just a case of making sure that it's turned on. So antivirus should be on all computers and laptops and mobiles. This is a hugely simple but effective way to detect and prevent malware from infecting your systems. There's an extra feature called a firewall, which is basically a buffer between your network and the internet. And most popular systems include a firewall for free. And all you need to do again is switch this nice security feature on. Easy enough. And my final tip is to choosing good passwords, which usually entails 3 random words. That's the advice from the National Cyber Security Centre. But this added benefit of turning on 2-factor authentication where available. So most popular websites and email systems now allow you and users to add an additional second layer of security to your accounts. So as well as adding your username and password, you're normally asked for an additional piece of information to prove that it's you. And it's normally a fingerprint, a message, or a text sent to your phone, or a code within an app itself. And what this means is, even if an attacker got your username and password, they still wouldn't be able to get access to your account without this additional information. So they were speaking earlier about paying the ransom. So I'm going to just touch on a little bit of that in a moment. So files encrypted by the most ransomware have no way of being decrypted by anyone other than the attacker. So the National Cyber Security Centre, who are the UK authoritative source for cyber security, they also support the National Crime Agency recommendations, and they do not encourage, endorse or condone the payment of ransom demands. They said, don't waste your time or money on services that promise to do it. However, with saying that, there is an initiative set up. There's a website called No More Ransom, and that's been set up by Europol's European Cybercrime Centre. And they are on their 4-year anniversary just the other month. And basically what it is, it's a decryption tool repository site, and it's designed to help define the type of malware and ransomware affecting your device. And they can check whether there's actually a decryption tool available for you to unlock your machines. They launched this in July in 2016, and they've had over 4.2 million visitors on the site across 188 countries, but they've helped stop an estimate of £632 million in ransomware demands from ending up in criminal pockets. So my main advice with that is not to pay the ransom, but if you are going to be trying to use these tools like in this No More Ransom website, that you should take precaution before running any unknown tools on your device. And I've got Alison that's going to talk you through some of the extra material and guidance that's produced.
Thank you very much. That was fascinating. It's lovely to have inputs into Kirstie and I's presentations from Ross and Carol, which is usually not something that we usually get, and it's just made it so much more real for me. So that was a really fantastic input. Thank you both. I'm going to do a little bit of signposting. We talk a lot about the NCSC, the National Cyber Security Centre, part of GCHQ, all spooky with no surnames. They have a fantastic amount of advice available to you. Some of it is sector specific, because they've had a lot of feedback that some of the language that was used in the main business guides weren't really sector appropriate. So they have a number of products that are geared for the third sector now. The Cybersecurity Small Charity Guide is excellent. That gives you, I think it gives you 5 top tips, so to speak, of actions that you really should be considering. Pretty much what Kirstie has just covered, backing up, preventing malware, all that sort of thing. It's put in really accessible language, and it's just really good stuff for you to avail yourself of. This is all the more sort of proactive information that they have out there. Another product that they have is a product called the Board Toolkit. And this is fantastic for trustees, for board members. Oh, I've got myself confused with my slides, which gives you a general introduction to cybersecurity, and really it empowers board members to ask the questions about what your organization needs to be doing to make sure you're that little bit more cyber resilient. So it's a really good tool to avail yourself of. Other stuff that is available on the NCSC website, I'll give a bit of a shout out to the top tips for staff. You can't always get Kirstie and I, because we are quite expensive, but you can avail yourself of an online e-learning platform called Top Tips for Staff. It's 30 minutes of presentations, multiple choice, all that sort of thing, and it's free, and it's fantastic. If you have a what do they call it, a learning system-y.
Oh yeah, it allows you to basically upload it onto your own learning platform if you've got that available, so you can embed it onto your system and check if staff have completed it, and there's, I'm sure, like a little certificate at the end to see how many have completed it.
So yeah, that's another one of the proactive products that are there. They're all free of charge. They're all on the website. So do go and have a good rootle around the NCSC website. It has got a little bit more user friendly over the years as well, because it did used to be a little bit daunting. I'm aware we've spoken a lot today about response and recovery. And as Carol said quite rightly, there's a lot of help out there for you should there be an incident. I think Kirstie will talk about a little bit about the new service that will be available from SBRC. But really, just if you wanted a quick recovery guide, the Response and Recovery Small Business Guide the NCSE have produced allows you to prepare for incidents, getting that plan in place, and then what you need to do should you unfortunately be subject to an attack. It gives you some things to think about: how to resolve, how to report, how to debrief, and what to learn from. So that's another really good, on the more reactive side of things, resource to have a look at and make yourself familiar with.
Yeah, I could jump in there with the SBRC phone call service. So we're setting up a new cyber incident helpline. So one of my colleagues, Mark, is going to be able to answer any phone calls with any organisation that is currently dealing with a cyber incident. He will help you understand what issue you're dealing with, help you kind of triage the situation. He might be able to give you good advice straight away that can help prevent this from happening. If that's not the case, he can signpost you on to useful advice and guidance elsewhere that's going to help you manage your incident. And we also have a collective of cybersecurity companies that we can pass you on to, and they can provide the more technical expertise that's required to help you understand the issues with your cyber incident. But that will be coming out probably in the next number of weeks or so. So I would just check on the SBRC website for any announcement on that, but the phone line will be set up for anybody that wants to get some good advice on that phone straight away. Mark is an ideal candidate to be there. He's came from Police Scotland and has got a fantastic cyber incident response background. I'm going to switch over to what to do if you fall victim.
Okay, that's back to me. We've talked quite a lot about reporting and escalation and people you need to be made aware of. So I'm gonna skip through this quite quickly because I know we're running short of time and we'd really love some time for questions. Here in Scotland, if you have an incident or an issue, we would encourage you to report to Police Scotland on 101. Down in England and the other countries, there is an organisation called Action Fraud. That's the Police's Central Fraud Reporting Centre for the UK. But up here in Scotland, we report directly to Police Scotland on 101. Reporting to the police may be a requirement of your insurance policy. So that's always something that you really need to bear in mind. It also gives the police cyber guys an actual a real representation of what's happening out there. It gives them some really good management information to enable them to make sure that they have the right resources behind trying to deal with this sort of crime. Carol mentioned the ICO, ICO data breaching procedures, notification. You would have come across this during your GDPR training. Under the 2018 Data Protection Act, if there is likely to be damage to the risks and freedoms of your data subjects or individuals, you have to follow the process to report that. And the ICO, a bit like you guys, don't really want to jump up and down on top of people. They want to work with you to make sure that you can take the appropriate remedial action, and that the damage that data breaches cause is actually absolutely minimized. The ICO, although you have a time limit of reporting of 72 hours from when you first discover a breach, they don't want full chapter and verse. That they're quite happy to take your initial impressions of what's happening. So never be fearful that you have to phone them and say, look, we've had an incident, and they won't expect hundreds and hundreds of answers. They'll work with you to work through this process to make sure that everybody's as good with this as they can be. OSCR require charities to report a notifiable incident. A notifiable incident is an adverse event, whether actual or alleged, which results in or risks significant loss of your charity's money or assets, damage to your charity's property, or harm to your charity's work, beneficiaries, or reputation. Most common types of incidents are frauds, theft, significant financial losses, criminal breaches, terrorism, extremist allegations, and safeguarding issues. If a notifiable event takes place, you need to report what happened and explain how you are dealing with it, even if you've reported to the police, donors, or another regulator. To report a serious incident, you should use the notifiable event form available on the OSCR website. Other regulators may be available or may require informing. That might be Financial Conduct Authority, or maybe your trustees, grant funders, that sort of thing. So yeah, reporting is very, very important for rounding this up and making sure that all the people that need to be involved with the management of any incident that you have are made fully aware. So I think that's it, Kirstie, is that right?
We've got two more just quickly, but I'll rattle through these so we can go on to questions. It's just to say that today we've announced that we're going to be doing another Cyber Scotland Week, which is a week-long festival of events on cyber awareness, cyber innovation, and cyber skills and careers. So mark those dates in your diary, 22nd to the 28th of February 2021. The website is just live today, so it's cyberscotlandweek.com, and you can find out how you can get involved and sign up for events or potentially host your own events, maybe on ransomware, who knows. And we've also got some really good advice and guidance more on that site as well. Alison, myself, and Police Scotland and government colleagues work together on creating a Cyber Scotland bulletin, essentially a newsletter that we produced highlighting all the sort of common scams and threats that we're seeing, and provide you with advice and guidance to sort of mitigate those scams. And the October edition is online on the cyberscotlandweek.com website, which you can have a nosy at later. And then yes, so we've got a couple of sites here. ncse.gov.uk/charity is your best bet to get more advice and guidance, and I'm sure Paul is popping some of them into the chat just now. But I'll stop my screen share so that we can jump back to the main slide, unless there's anything further from you on this one, Alison.
No, I just want to see how scared they all look, Kirstie. There's some scared faces. Our work here is done.
Exactly. Thank you so much, Kirstie, Alison, Ross and Carol. That was a very interesting, really good and a nice comprehensive overview of that subject. I certainly learnt some stuff there as well, which is great. We're sort of running over time. My suggestion is that we carry on for a little bit, because we've got some questions in the chat already. If you need to leave, feel free to pop away. Do say goodbye in the chat box so we know. But I'll let it run for a little bit longer so that we can get some of these questions answered, if that's okay. Now, the first one was a question about the impact, the stats about the costs to victims. Now, you did have one stat, I think, about the overall impact but do you have other stats, maybe the impact on the charity sector in Scotland? Have you got any information on what is the size of this problem in the sector?
I can look that out for you and share that with you. I think we're going to share the slides after the seminar anyway, so I'll look out some stats and make sure that comes through to you.
Great. There was another one that came up before the session, and I know we briefly touched on it, Alison and Kirstie, and I think you said that you would need a technical input into that, but it's about the backup to Microsoft 365 or whatever. Would you like to respond to that one, where somebody was asking the question about we've got this system that we use, but we don't have, we've been told it doesn't have any backup, we can't afford to buy the necessary space on the servers, what do we do? So do you have any response to that, just to let people know what you're thinking? Kirstie, maybe?
I was going to say, you did, Alison, but
well, we did have a little bit of a chat about this, and we weren't sure. We decided we needed to escalate this to a man with a screwdriver and a little bit more technical knowledge than us. It seems bizarre because of the whole idea of cloud services and online backups that you should be needing to buy extra space, but I don't know. So we need to do a little bit of a dig and come back to whoever asked the question with some answers on that one. So please leave with, we won't forget, and just double check for you.
Great, you're going to have loads of homework after this. Kirstie, did you want to come in?
Yeah, I was going to, the only thing I was saying is the you know, it's having that open conversation with the you know, the people that are involved in that, because it's a case of, you know, people say that they don't have enough money to do this, or they don't have enough money for training or whatever, but actually you have to think ahead and actually think of the impact that it's going to cause. So if that's going to, you know, have a £25,000 ransomware request at the end of it, actually investing that little bit in advance of time is maybe your better solution. So that's my only sort of position there.
Great. No, thank you for that. Now, there was one on staff and social media, and I think that one was for Oscar, so maybe I'll start off answering that and then pass it over. I think there it's an interesting one. We struggled as an organisation ourselves, as Oscar, to even ever have a social media channel because we were so terrified. The most important thing to do when you have social media is to make sure you have a policy, you understand how people are going to use it, and that they are very clear about how they're going to use it, because it's a fantastic tool for a charity, so you should make use of it, but you do have to be careful about how you're using that. Kirstie or Alison, do you want to say anything about that? Or maybe Carol or Ross as well, because you've had some cases. Yeah, Kirstie?
Yeah, I can pop in there. So obviously social media is a great tool for charities to use to speak to their customers, and there's no way that I would be suggesting not to use these sort of technical you know, solutions. That is ideal, but what there does come with is a little bit of risk involved, and it's just managing that risk. So on the NCSC page, they actually have things, specific guidance on social media security that people can take a look at. It's about, you know, if you think from your charity perspective, who has access to that? What is the guidelines in place of what are you pushing out on your social media content? Is there a sort of standard that you should be, you know, complying to? But yeah, it's an ideal thing to have the two-factor authentication switched on to your social media sites as well. That does come with Twitter. You just have to switch it on, so that's a little extra security feature there straight away.
I think my little chip in is, and it's not just for social media, it's for people's access to systems all over the organisation, and just give them what they need to do their job. Because you don't need everybody accessing the finance system. You don't need everybody looking at social media if they don't need to post on it, or having access to be able to post on it. And the other thing that's always worth bearing in mind, should you need to be quite stringent on your exiting procedures when people are leaving the organisation, and lock down their access rights very, very quickly, because there's nothing worse than you sometimes see on social media, the disgruntled ex-employee that's still got access to Twitter that, yeah, is a little bit shouty, that they're not very happy. So yeah, just bear all that in mind.
Yeah, that's a very good top tip, actually. I don't know, Carol or Ross, do you want to come in on that? We've had sort of cases here. Carol, yeah?
I was just going to say, we have had quite a few cases, but it kind of stems back to the even more fundamental principles of social media, that a lot of it comes from people putting their organisation's name on their personal social media accounts. and then they become vulnerable to people either approaching them to try and get into the IT of the organisation, or just that's where a lot of the squabbles and arguments come from, and they've been told they're representing that charity. So being very clear as to putting on Twitter that I work for OSCR and then putting underneath it saying retweets are not endorsements doesn't cover it. If you're willing to put on, it's like very physically, if you were wearing a council uniform and you ended up in a brawl in the street, the council would say you were representing the council while you were there. So if you're willing to go and have on your profiles that's the organisation that you're there is a link now to that organisation. So consider that in your social media policies as well, because a lot of our concerns come from online squabbles that somebody has said, and their argument would be, it was in my personal account. It doesn't matter. Someone has perceived that they're representing the charity when they've done that. So.
Yeah, thanks, Carol. And Ross, yeah?
I would just back up what Carol said, but I think more and more often now you're actually seeing individuals setting up 2 profiles, one for a professional capacity and just keeping it purely for that thing, and then the other one, which I'm assuming we're all guilty of using social media for, is posting pictures of the weekend and all that sort of stuff, and keeping them separate in that way could kind of keep you right.
I like Paula's advice. Don't say anything you wouldn't say to your mum. Go with that one every time.
Or
your granny.
Yeah, your granny maybe, yeah. Great, okay, I think that's answered that one. There's an interesting one here from Martin, who I think is still here. Yes, Martin's still here, he could have asked himself. I'll ask him to say, Martin, you can come back in if you don't get the answer you need. And it's about the reporting piece. Interestingly, you've talked about where you report when you get something serious, and that's great, and it's very clear. What about, is there somewhere you can report when there's low-level cyber attacks going on, when it hasn't really had an impact on your organisation, but where it would be quite good for somebody to know that it's going on so that you get that information? Is there anything like that you can do?
Yeah, there's a portal called the CISP, is the technical term or the abbreviation for it. Now, let me try and remember what it is. Cyber Incident Reporting
Sharing Partnership.
Sharing Partnership.
Something like that.
So this is a network. It's basically like a page where people can report any sort of incidents that they're seeing in their network and in their organisations. It could be simple things that is maybe not had a big impact to the actual organisation itself, but actually later down the line it could have caused more damage, or an example. But the sharing partnership, there's a specific one for Scottish companies as well, called Signet. I'm not on it myself, but that's something that I'm looking to try and get on, because they do a bit of intelligence sharing on there of what they're seeing in their organisations. That's the one that's jumping out at me. I don't know if there's any one that you can say, Alison.
The one I'm thinking about that came into being quite recently is the NCSE Suspicious Email Reporting Service.
Oh, yeah. That's another
when you get this dodgy email on a Friday afternoon from the CEO of SCVO wanting Amazon vouchers, you can forward it to a particular email address from NCSE, which goes into a system that they have that investigates the URLs that are associated with the emails. It's taken down, it's a huge amounts of URLs. There's been over
under 3 million reports
that this started in, I think it was April, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And it's really, really simple to do. So anything that you get that looks a bit fishy, excuse the pun, forward it to the suspicious email reporting service, and you get the details of that on the NCSE website.
Yeah, it's report@phishing.gov.uk. You just forward on the email. It's as easy as that. And it does make a difference, because the more people that report these things, the quicker it gets taken down. And I think they've taken down over 10,000 scam sites. So it's definitely worth reporting and telling people as much as possible.
I think as well, depending on the size of your organisation and how much you're relying on communications, you might want to even keep a record yourself as to how often this is happening, just so that you can inform your own training and your own systems to tell people that this is, even to keep examples of the type of things that you have been approached with that you've spotted. It can be quite handy to do even internally as well, if you have the resources available, obviously.
Kirstie and I do a phishing training session, which is very good. We use the resources from the CPNI, and they have a number of, can you identify if this is a phishing email or not a phishing email? And they are incredibly legitimate looking, and it's certainly a good session to put your staff through, because we think we will spot them, but some of these are so good.
Great. I'm very, very well aware that we've run over time, and I usually pride myself on finishing these things on time, so I've absolutely failed. So I want to thank everybody. Now, you may have been left with questions after the session, which is absolutely fine. Please get back in touch with us or with Kirstie or with Alison, and then also tap them up for all that wonderful training that they do, and see if you can get that for your organisations. But I think that's been very good, and we've had a small turnout today. We'll see how many people look at this video, but it's the kind of thing that I think we could explore doing again in the future, because it is one of the major things that we get coming in through our notifiable events, which we've mentioned. It's pretty much the top one at given times during the year in terms of charities reporting to us. So it is a real concern in the sector. I think people are extremely worried about it. I think, as Carol said earlier on, there is a real sense sometimes that people want to bury their head in the sands because it's so embarrassing or it's so slightly scary, and oh well, if we don't do anything it'll be fine. So we are very keen to carry on exploring this, trying to make sure you've got the information. We'll be updating stuff on our website as and when there's important things coming through, but as you've heard today from Kirstie and Alison, there's a lot of sources of good information on this, so please tap that up, please have a look, and hopefully we can all get a little bit safer as we go along this journey. So thank you very much for coming. Can I say a massive thank you? First of all, I'll start with Carol and Ross, because I didn't even introduce them at the beginning, which is very shocking. I hadn't had any lunch, Carol, that's my excuse. But anyway, Carol and Ross, who are here from OSCR and who've done a great job in presenting some very good specific stuff, which I think is very helpful when you want to get into the detail of that. And a massive thank you to Alison and Kirstie for coming out this afternoon and supporting us on this. And you will find this online afterwards, so it will never go away now. It will haunt you for the rest of your lives. So thanks very much, guys, and speak to you soon. Take care.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.